In the summer of 1976, halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis spotted her, a frail woman, in the third row, shoes caked with dust. Security whispered in his ear, "She had walked 10 miles to be here." If you believe music has the power to connect strangers in a heartbeat, stay with me, because what Elvis did next wasn't in the set list, and it changed a life forever. The heat was heavy enough to taste. August 1976. The kind of southern summer where the air sticks to your skin. Outside the Birmingham Civic Center, the sidewalk shimmered. Folding chairs lined the block. Fans fanned themselves with ticket stubs, paper programs, anything they could find. A teenager sold cold Cokes from a styrofoam cooler. The hiss of traffic mixed with the distant whine of cicada. And then, moving slower than the rest, came Martha Lane, 72 years old. Straw hat tilted low, a faded blue dress that had seen too many summers, and scuffed shoes already dusted from the walk. In her right hand, a crumpled paper sack. In her left, a ticket she held like it might vanish. Witnesses later said she'd turned down 2 offers for a ride. She'd walked here from her apartment 2 towns over, about 10 miles, just to see Elvis Presley one more time. She didn't hurry. Every few yards, she'd stop, press the ticket to her chest, and catch her breath. A group of younger fans offered her a seat in the shade. She thanked them, but kept moving. "I'll rest inside," she told them. The closer she got, the louder the murmur of the crowd became. Scalpers whispering prices, security waving people forward. The warm smell of asphalt gave way to the cooler scent of the Civic Center lobby, a mix of popcorn, perfume, and polished concrete. Inside, she moved with the tide of people toward the arena door. Ushers in maroon jackets scanned tickets with quick nods. Her hands trembled as she passed hers over. The usher glanced down, then back at her. "Front row," he said, almost surprised. A camera could have followed just her feet now. The careful shuffle across the floor, the soft scrape of worn soles. "Row 1, seat 7. She sat, placing the paper sack on her lap, smoothing her dress, looking around like she was memorizing the play. Overhead, riggers checked the last stage lights. The big black curtains on either side of the stage swayed faintly from the hum of the air system. On stage, a stray guitar chord rang out. A warm-up note from James Burton's Telecaster. Someone behind her muttered, "Best seats in the house." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the empty mic stand in the center, gold spotlight already aimed at it. And then, the sudden blackout. Every light in the house dropped, except for a soft glow at the edges of the stage. The crowd roared. You could feel the vibration through the seats. Martha leaned forward, both hands on her paper sack, lips pressed together like a prayer. The first note of C.C. Rider tore through the speakers. The curtain pulled back, and there he was, Elvis Presley in a white jumpsuit, walking toward the edge of the stage, directly toward her side of the crowd. By the third song, Elvis was in full stride, white jumpsuit catching the stage lights, jet black hair perfectly in place, sweat already beading on his brow. He worked the stage like a man who knew every eye in the building was on him. The TCB band was tight, every note locked in, brass section popping, drums snapping. The crowd moved like one giant wave, arms swaying, cameras flashed. But then, between verses of "I Got a Woman," Elvis's gaze flickered to the front row. Not the whole crowd, one seat. Martha Lane sat there scarfless, still holding that paper sack in her lap. She wasn't clapping or dancing, just smiling faintly, her shoulders rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. A stagehand, moving from one side of the curtain to the other, leaned in toward Elvis as he passed the mic stand. Witnesses say the words were simple. "That lady, front row, she walked here, 10 miles. Elvis's right eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly, but his eyes, they stayed on her as he sang the next line. A photographer in the press pit saw the look and snapped a frame. Elvis, half-lit, mid-note, staring down at an older woman, clutching a bag. That photo would end up in Monday's paper, though no one yet knew why it mattered. The song ended. Applause washed over the stage in a wall of sound. Elvis took a step back, reached for his water bottle, but didn't drink. His gaze drifted again, this time, longer. Charlie Hodge, standing just behind him with a guitar, caught the look. Elvis leaned back, voice low, almost drowned out by the crowd. "Charlie, get me a scar." Charlie's face shifted from confusion to understanding in a heartbeat. He slipped backstage for a moment, returning with a folded white scarf. Elvis didn't take it right away. Instead, he stepped back to the mic, easing into "Love Me," but he wasn't scanning the crowd anymore. His eyes kept returning to seat 7, each time. His smile softened just slightly. A fan in the third row later swore she saw Elvis's foot tap twice, not to the beat, but as if giving a signal. The spotlight caught a thin thread of dust in the air, swirling above the front row. The scent of hairspray, cologne, and the faint metal tang from the mic stand filled the stage. And then, on the final note, Elvis turned his back to the audience, an unusual move for him. He looked at Charlie, nodded once, and stepped toward the side stairway. The crowd didn't yet understand. They kept clapping, chanting his name. But Martha saw it. She sat up straighter, fingers tightening on the paper sack, as Elvis began making his way down from the stage, heading straight toward her. The first chord of the next song had barely rung out when Elvis did something nobody expected. He raised his left hand, palm open, fingers steady, and the band stopped cold. The sound died mid-intro. The arena fell into an uneven silence, broken only by a few confused shouts. Stage lights hung still in the haze, their heat pressing down like a second skin. This wasn't in the plan. The set list for that night, later confirmed by a crew member, had no gaps between songs 3 and 4, but Elvis wasn't looking at the band. He was looking at Martha. Without a word, he walked to the far right of the stage. White scarf, now looped loosely in his hand. The spotlight followed, catching the rhinestones along his chest and the edges of his belt buckle. A woman in the second row gasped, "He's going to her." The words rippled through the crowd like a rumor picking up speed. From Martha's view, it was the slow descent of a king from his throne, each stair creaking slightly under his boot. The closer he came, the more she could see the beads of sweat at his temple, the glint of the gold cross around his neck. He stopped just in front of her, bent slightly at the waist. His voice was warm, southern, almost a whisper. "I hear you came a long way, honey." She nodded once. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. With one smooth motion, he draped the scarf over her shoulders. It was still damp from the heat of his neck. She closed her eyes for half a second, holding onto the fabric like it was a lifeline. The audience clapped and cheered, but Elvis didn't turn back to the stage. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder and called, "Gospel boys." The band hesitated for half a beat. Then Charlie Hodge strummed the opening to "How Great Thou Art." The mood shifted instantly, from the electric thump of rock and roll to something reverent. Elvis stood there still holding her hand, and began to sing. His voice was lower, slower. Each note seemed to settle over the crowd like a blanket. A woman in the aisle wiped her eyes. 2 men in the press pit stopped shooting and just listened. For the first verse, he sang only to her, eyes locked, grip steady. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a gift. The final chorus swelled, his voice rising, the brass section leaning in. The song ended on a long echoing note that hung in the rafters. Applause exploded, but Elvis still didn't let go of her hand. He squeezed it once, then leaned in, as if about to say something only she could hear. And then, without letting go, Elvis gestured toward the paper sack in her lap. The crowd's cheers thinned to a murmur as Elvis nodded toward the paper sack in Martha's lap. "What you got there?" he asked softly, leaning close enough that only the first few rows could hear. Her hands trembled as she opened the sack. From inside she pulled a folded quilt, colors muted by years, edges finished with neat, Careful stitches, bluebirds curved across the pattern. And in the center, in red thread, the words "thank you." Later she would tell a reporter she'd been sewing it for months. Starting the day she heard Elvis was coming to Birmingham, "It kept my hands busy," she said, "and my mind on something good." Elvis took the quilt in both hands, holding it up just enough for the flashbulbs to catch it. The stage lights caught the fine threads, making the birds almost glow. Then he set it gently across his forearm and leaned forward. His hug was slow, deliberate. No quick pat on the back, just a long, still embrace. You could see the curve of his jaw, pressed to her hair, the fabric of his jumpsuit bunching slightly as he pulled her in. For nearly 30 seconds, the arena was silent, except for the soft hum of the amp behind them. In that silence, you could feel something shift. This wasn't a showman working the crowd. This was a man, mid-performance, letting everything else fade out. A flashbulb popped, another. The crowd erupted again, but the hug didn't break right away. Finally, Elvis pulled back, keeping one hand on her shoulder. He smiled, said something too quiet for the microphones to catch, and then looked past her toward the side of the stage. A quick tilt of his head, and his tour manager, Joe Esposito, was moving fast. Joe leaned in as Elvis spoke a few words, nodding once before disappearing backstage. Whatever Elvis had said, it was enough to make Joe push through 3 layers of security with purpose. Elvis turned back to Martha. He picked up the quilt again, folded it once, and laid it neatly back in her lap. His fingertips lingered for a moment on the edge of the fabric. He straightened, took the mic from Charlie, and without another word, launched into Teddy Bear. The mood shot back to light and playful, but every few lines he looked down at her again. A photographer near the left aisle would later say, "You could tell something else was coming." He had that look, like the show wasn't over for her. As the song wrapped and the crowd roared, Elvis gave her a wink. Then, for the first time that night, he stepped fully into the wings and disappeared, leaving the band to vamp without him. The final notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" were still echoing when Elvis left the stage for good that night. No encore, no drawn-out bows, just a quick wave and a grin before the curtains fell. Out front, the house lights came up. The magic softened into the usual post-show chaos. Folding chairs scraping, ushers calling for clear aisles, the faint smell of popcorn and perfume hanging in the air. Fans clutched their souvenirs, replaying their favorite moments in hurried voice. Martha stayed in her seat, hands folded over the quilt in her lap. She didn't seem in a rush to leave. According to an usher, she was the last person in her row when 2 men in security jackets approached. One leaned in and said, "Ma'am, would you come with us?" Gasps rippled through the few fans still lingering. She stood slowly, tucking the quilt under her arm, and followed them toward a side door. The hallway beyond was cooler, quieter, the distant hum of vending machines replacing the roar of the crowd. Faint strains of the band packing up their gear drifted from somewhere backstage. They led her to a small dressing room, lit by bare bulbs around a mirror. On the table sat a glass bottle of Coca-Cola, beads of condensation sliding down the sides. "Have a seat," one of the men said. She lowered herself into a folding chair, the metal cool against her back. A moment later, the door opened. Elvis stepped in, no longer in his white jumpsuit. Now he wore a blue satin robe with gold trim, the collar open, hair slightly damp. He smiled wide, crossing the room in a few strides. In his hands was a black guitar case. "You've given me something I'll keep forever," he said, nodding toward the quilt on her lap. "Now this is for you." He set the case across her knees. The latches clicked open, revealing a gleaming Martin acoustic guitar. Across its pale spruce top, in bold black ink, was his signature Elvis Presley. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She ran her fingers just above the strings, not touching them yet. Elvis leaned down, resting one hand lightly on hers. "Play it," he said softly, "or just keep it close." She nodded, eyes brimming. The room was silent, except for the faint tick of the wall clock. Outside, a reporter tried to push past security. He'd heard something unusual was happening backstage. By the time he got inside, Elvis was gone, leaving Martha still in the chair, guitar case open, scarf around her shoulders. The next morning, the Birmingham News ran a front-page photo, Elvis in his robe, bending over Martha with the guitar between them. But that wasn't the end of the story. Something else was still on its way to her. 7 days after the concert, Martha Lane's mailbox held something unusual. A cream-colored envelope with her name written in looping black ink. No return address. Her niece, who often checked the mail for her, said the envelope felt heavier than normal. Inside, the paper was thick, the kind you'd expect for a wedding invitation, not a letter. Martha sat at her kitchen table, quilt folded neatly on the back of her chair, guitar case propped against the wall. She slid a letter opener along the seal. A single sheet slipped out, handwritten in blue ink. "You'll always have a seat in the front row, Elvis." Tucked behind it was a laminated card, about the size of a playing card. In the center, a gold star. Across the top in bold letters, "Lifetime All-Access Pass." She held it between her fingers, like it might vanish. According to her niece, Martha didn't speak for a long moment. She just stared at the pass, lips pressed together, tears collecting in the corners of her eyes. Finally, she whispered, "I guess I'll be going to Graceland one day." The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Afternoon light spilled through lace curtains, catching the lamination so the gold star seemed to flicker. Word spread quickly in her small Alabama town. Neighbors dropped by just to see the pass in person. One man joked that it was worth more than her apartment. She'd smile and shake her head, but she kept the pass in a frame above her kitchen table, right where the morning sun hit it. A friend later said, she didn't care about the value, it was about the way he saw her that night, like she wasn't just another face in the crowd. In the years that followed, Martha didn't make every Elvis show, but whenever she could, she'd pack the scarf and the pass in her purse, and sit in the front row, seat 7 if she could get it. When she passed away, decades later, her niece found the scarf, the quilt, the guitar, and the pass all stored together in a cedar chest. The letter was still folded in its envelope, edges yellowed but ink clear. Some say the night Elvis stopped mid-show, for Martha was the truest version of the man, generous, unhurried, paying attention when it mattered. Others just call it one of those rare moments when kindness stops a room. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. What's the smallest gesture someone ever made for you? One you've never forgotten?